So then, at that point, you're going to take the data that's sitting in the Mongo thing, and you're going to pass that data out of Mongo into this thing called Hadoop. And we'll talk a lot more about what Hadoop is later. And then after we bunge on the data with Hadoop and like change it, then we're going to take the output out of Hadoop as an XML file, and then we're going to use SQL Server integration services and pass it out of there back into Windows into SQL Server. And then once we get it into SQL Server, we will have this orders database, and it'll have these fields, which we'll worry about much later. And then you'll write a good old ASPX forms app that has 3 different forms that lets people query and get various chunks of information out of it. And then we will take the same data and we will build a cube using SQL analysis services. And then we'll write another window. This is Windows Forms, not Windows. That's ASP. This will be Forms. And it'll have several forms that will use what are called MDX queries. So when you query SQL, you use the query language. When you query a BIQ, you use this language called MDX, multi-dimensional expressions or something. Okay? And then you'll go enjoy the summer. So I hope you find it somewhat fun just to do all this thing. The idea is to really think about all the different ways data can be stored and what the advantages of various data structures are. Yes, sir?
So we're going to take it, translate it into Mongo, and then we're going to take that translation of Mongo, or download, update it into MongoDB, and spit it out as an XML file and put it in a SQL database?
Now, you missed a step. We're going to read it out of Mongo into Hadoop. And then we're going to munge it on Hadoop, and Hadoop is going to like structure the data. And then it'll spit it out of Hadoop, and then we'll go to XML, and then we'll import it with SIS into SQL.
And create a SQL database?
Yep.
So we're creating a Mongo database, taking the Hadoop form of that, and then making a SQL database, and we're going to query on that database?
And then you're going to take that, and we're going to export the SQL in the SQL database into a BIQ.
What's a BIQ?
You're just going to have to take this course to find out. That's why you paid all those bucks. Okay, so that was that. Okay, now, who has done a ASP MVC project before? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Did we do you?
Huh? If you took Programming 117 with me, the last 2 classes, I would have gone through it. Okay. All right. So I want to do a brief review of all this stuff, which is Windows Forms, ASPX, ASP MVC, because we'll be using them. We'll do that. And then we'll get into an overview of the types of data. And then we'll talk a little bit about the project, and I hope we can get all this done today, and then we'll start in seriousness the next class. So I'm going to start now by looking at something called, this is the book, which I've already told you is there, right? Okay. So I want to look at Windows Forms PowerPoint, and I got 2 of them. So there's Simple Win Forms and Simple Win Forms SQL. So if I come over here, you'll see that the number 2 item is Simple ASPX. So that's using good old Programming 117, a quick review of that. And then we'll look at a Windows Forms application doing pretty much the same thing, so you get used to that.
Are we gonna be writing any JavaScript?
Yes, you'll be writing JavaScript.
Client-side code, I'm guessing, or node code, or?
Yeah, the first homework you're gonna have is, you're gonna write a JavaScript client that's gonna communicate with a Node.js server. All of this running inside of this virtual machine that you're hopefully downloading right this minute. Okay. And then I don't think you'll see JavaScript again, but we only spend like a couple days on each one of these technologies. So I want to go here and I want to find simple ASPX. This project looks like it's called Dork Nozzle only because I started with an old Dork Nozzle project. I mean, feel free to get your phones out and go on Facebook and Twitter if you really feel quite confident you remember all this. So this is a silly program which so to give you the right context, what we're really doing here this is the important part of all of this, is it gets a little confusing because when I started this project, Visual Studio started up a web server, and then it opened a browser window and pointed it to the home page. And then the program made a call to SQL on the box. So it almost just looks like a little program ran, okay? But it's really a simulation of a very real environment. In the real environment, someplace, there is a window, generally a Windows box because it's serving ASPX pages. Although ASPX is now an open project, so it's available to run on Linux as well. Anyhow, so this is a Windows server that's running, well, in the real world, it would be something, Internet Information Server, which is what you use to host websites, okay? And then somewhere far away is your browser. You know, maybe it's on your phone, and you open the browser and you give it a URL, which goes to that physical device and goes to that directory of that web server, and it looks for your app/home. And then when it wants to spit that page back to you, it reads the page off of here and it wants to send the page back to you. It notices that it's not an HTML file, it's an ASPX file. So it runs it through a preprocessor, which is the ASPX processor. And the ASPX processor looks for all those funny little lines that says, oh, I need to execute C# code and change the HTML before I send it back. And part of this might well be to go to a SQL Server box, which is in Pittsburgh. Okay, and that's really what we're simulating. So if you wanted to actually deploy a real web app, you have to configure a web server, you have to copy the files to the web server, and then you have to configure a real database engine someplace, and then you have to give these guys privileges so this guy is allowed to read data from the databases. Okay. So this is this beautiful app, and all it does is spit out some data that's in a database. So reviewing this, well, first off, not all our ASP pages, but generally, we used a master page. What's going on down here? Why is that not part of that? Oh, I think it's we're running. Are we running? No, we're not running. Okay, so generally we have a master page, and the whole idea of a master page is if you want the same content and background on all your pages, you create one of these. It's like a standard form you're going to reuse over and over again. this little thing here is our body, and in the body is this thing called a content placeholder. So then all the web pages that I create, they don't have to have all that junk on the top and the bottom. All they do is insert their content right there. And then this app only has one page, which is this page. And you'll see up here, this is the content placeholder that goes in the heading, and there's nothing in it. And then this is the content that gets inserted into the home page. So what happens is when you ask for this page called, whatever it's called, mileage or something, it pulls the home page out, and then it pulls this unique, or not the home page, the master page. Then it pulls the specific page, and then it basically glues them together. Now it has one page. And then it processes it for C#, which modifies it, and then it spits it out. And in this particular case, this is using this thing called a repeater, an ASP repeater. And the ASP repeater will, for each line of data that it is fed, will do, it'll write out this HTML over and over and over again for each one. And then we use the ASP immediate mode, and these are fields that are coming out of the database. So then looking at the page behind, this page doesn't have any buttons. It just has a page load method. So when the page is loaded, this is a nice short summary of how we do SQL in this class. If you took 210 with me, you learned more interesting ways, but we're not going to use those. We're going to use this simple one. So we're using 3 ADO objects. The SQL connection object, which manages the, remember the server's actually in Pittsburgh, so it has to set up network connection, it has to authenticate, has to do all this important stuff so that your app on the web server can actually communicate with that web server 3,000 miles away.
This is C#, right?
Yeah. You shouldn't be squinting at the screen. You should be looking on your own screen.
Yeah, I don't have Visual Studio, so
How do you not have Visual Studio?
I'm on my laptop.
Oh. I hope you're going to remedy that.
Yeah, of course.
Did anybody successfully download that file?
Yes.
You got the whole thing already?
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. So that's going to work. That's encouraging. And the next thing we're using is the SQL command object. And the SQL command object is the one that actually uses the connection to, on your behalf, push commands across and get the answers. And then we're using a reader object. And that's kind of special in that it actually is the one that issues the SQL's command. The SQL reader, when you tell it to do something, actually it says it executes one SQL command over and over and over again until it gets to the end of the row of records, and then it says, I'm done. Okay? So when we used to do this code, I never bothered to point this out in 117 because it was sort of needless confusion. But when you say reader equal com execute reader, okay, what you're doing is you're calling our command object and you're saying execute reader, and it's returning the results to the reader. Well, what it's really doing is it's loading this reader up with the SQL command it needs, and then it does one SQL row, one command, and it gets the first row of data. And then when you bind it to the data source, it takes one row of data and puts it in the data source, which in this case is a repeater. And then it does it over and over and over again, each time using that format. And then when eventually the reader will get a message back from SQL that says no more records, then it will end and we're done. done. So do you all remember how to do that, right? You can all write that kind of SQL code.
That looks very familiar, yes.
So that's a nice little program. If you forgot something, you can use the cut and paste, which is pretty much how they log me out. Okay, so I'm going to go back over here for now. And there on the desktop, spring 420. Okay, now I want to look at this program 3, which is a Windows Forms version of a similar program, to review how we did it with Windows Forms. So this one, this might look like a test we had. So it's a simple Windows form. It's getting back the 3 rows of data in a simple database. This one actually does have an add button, so I can add another car here and do an add car. And it's computing the average miles per gallon here. So let's look at a Windows format. If you've forgotten it, when you create a Windows form, you can go over to the side here in the toolbox and you drag things out just like you did with ASP. So I dragged out this thing, which we will use to show data. These are just labels, 2 buttons, dragged them out. And then, unlike ASP always creates a page load method. So when the page is loaded, that method is there and you can put code into it. Windows Forms, you have to double click in like a no place, not on any of the objects. You click in the gray area and it'll create a what should I do when the form loads method. Now I already have one, so if I click there, it'll take me to it. And now this is just like ASP. We're looking at the logical code behind. And this is that method that I just created. Well, I would have if I had double clicked that. And this is called form1 load, which is just like the page load method. This will run the very first time it's loaded, okay? And what does it do? It calls a refresh method, which we'll look at in a minute, and that's it. And then I have a method just like ASP. When you click on that button, it's going to write data, and here's my refresh method.
So does that take your entire data set and rewrite it into the table as opposed to just grabbing that row?
Hold on to that question. Okay, here's the refresh method, which I call when the page is loaded, and also you'll see that if you push the button to add a new row of data, after I add the new row of data, I also do the refresh. Okay. Now, the reason I'm not answering your question is I want to make something pretty clear here. This program, as programs really should, does not have the SQL code stuck right in the form program. Okay. It has. You should always separate things into as many small classes as you can. So you have isolation, bug isolation, and you have better reuse. So this has a class over here that I added called